So thanks to Jörn and the organisers for inviting me. My name is Jim. I'm working for the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. We're Ireland's energy agency. Our job is to, I'm head of a modelling group in the agency, and our job is to take a look across all sectors on efficiency and also to look at renewable energy alternatives and to make some recommendations to the Department for Communication, Energy and Natural Resources on how they might shape energy policy in Ireland. So my presentation zooms out a little bit from the building level to start with. I'm sort of a policy guy. I'm not an engineer, but we work with a lot of engineers in order to build our models. Unlocking the energy efficiency opportunity was about looking at how we're going in Ireland with regards to our energy efficiency targets and looking at what more needs to be done across all sectors of the economy to get more energy savings. So we built some fairly detailed models of all sectors using Irish data, and that includes of the commercial building stock. And I'll focus a little bit on the commercial building stock at the end because I think that's a particular area of interest for you guys. And so just in terms of what's in the report, we take a look at the residential, commercial, industry, public sector and transport, and we look at the technical and economic potential for energy savings across those sectors. We highlight some key opportunities for energy savings. The novel part of this modelling is that we included a layer on consumer decision making. So we're interested in the technical potential, what's possible with technology. We understand that a smaller portion of that is going to be economic to achieve in the real world, and a smaller bit again is going to be possible to get with policies and measures because people have this decision-making process and they're not always going to make economically rational decisions. So we have a layer built in the model on that. We make some key policy recommendations which we have to do as an energy agency. We look at the exchequer perspective because that's interesting for government to design new policies and think about how much they might cost. And we look a little bit at beyond 2020. The purpose of this document is all looking towards 2020 really in terms of what needs to be done to reach our national targets. And just to highlight that a lot has been done already, so you mightn't be aware that households and businesses save about 700 million per annum on the back of all the work that's been done over the last few years. So about 300,000 homes have upgraded for better energy efficiency, saving them money. We've worked with about 3,000 SMEs through our SME program at SEAI. We have 160, the largest industry energy users, signed up to a large industry energy network where we facilitate a lot of information sharing and special working groups. And we push them towards strategic energy management through the ISO standards, and we also have more recently launched an energy efficient design standard, which you might be interested in if you don't already know about it. Essentially looking to get savings off the plan before things are built, so that you put your plans for a new installation through this new process and come out with a design that would be optimised for energy use before you started building. We have a public sector program. There are building regulations in place, specifically on commercial. There's a revision to those building regulations coming up at the moment, which you might be interested in. So it's time to engage with Department for Environment, who are responsible for those. There'll be some public consultation on that. So you might be interested in that in terms of what goes into those regs around building energy management systems or the likes, or whether that's possible. And more we're starting to work with community-based organisations, so sort of aggregating projects up on in terms of getting some dwellings, residential dwellings, together with some of the local community facilities and even some commercial businesses and packaging them together, and so getting some economies of scale for suppliers to do big hits on energy efficiency. So a lot done. And we know with all of this work there's an upfront investment cost, and when we approach that from a policy point of view, we're able to tell building owners and managers that there is an upfront cost, but if you can get over that, the value of the savings tends to outweigh the investment. And we're more and more thinking about these multiple benefits in the context of energy efficiency. So again, I've zoomed out to the policy level, so some of this mightn't be as meaningful for you as it is for people making policy, but we're trying to get government to think about why they do energy efficiency and to think about that beyond purely just seeking the energy savings. Warmer homes and buildings are healthier and people in them have better well-being. That has a value. Businesses are more competitive when their energy costs are lower compared to their competitors. At a national level, we're reducing our import bill and things like that. So These are all interesting to policymakers and I think somehow probably interesting to businesses looking to save energy. There are more reasons to do it than purely the one you can measure on the bill. So this is a curve that we came up with as part of this study across all the sectors I mentioned. So you can see the different colour codings there. Each one of these bars represents a different measure. So it might be an insulation measure in the residential sector or a change in a process in industry. Some of them are behavioural, some of them are technical. So some of the cheaper measures in transport are behaviour related. Essentially anything below the bar, it's like one of the McKinsey cost curves, anything below the bar, the value of the energy saved from that measure outweighs the initial cost over the lifetime of that measure. So we make some assumptions about how long measures last. And the way this is constructed is that the most cost-effective measures are implemented first, which ends up making some measures that might be cost-effective on their own non-cost-effective once you've done the cheap ones first. So we learned a few lessons from that about seeking to go for packages of measures rather than individual measures. So you could imagine that if you packaged up some measures that were above the line with some that were below, the overall package might end up being cost effective. So we're trying to sort of put that way of thinking into the policy design and encourage deeper holistic retrofits or in the new build sense. A lot of the new build stuff is down this end because it's regulation, so it's cheap to do compared to the retrofit. So we think we have a pretty clear business case at that stage, and in the policy context, we need to sort of really ramp up what we're doing at this stage. Message seems to have got through to government that if we don't make our targets for 2020, there are going to be fines and compliance costs coming down the line. So there's a lot of action at the moment in policy spheres looking for new ideas and looking for ways to get energy savings. At the moment, I know in our own agency, in SEAI, we have some money going around for people trying to develop ESCO models. There's a few case studies on the ESCO model on our website. It's a government priority to try to grease the wheels for ESCOs and energy performance contracting. I'm not sure whether any other member state in Europe really has that sewn up and have seen hundreds or thousands of ESCO models go and be successful, but we've probably got 6 or 8 good examples on our own website at SEAI that you could take a look at and describing that process. And we've a small scheme at the moment supporting people who are looking at using an energy performance contract or ESCO process with some finances. And as I say, we report the results through the case studies. So we're doing a lot of thinking about how we accelerate the uptake of energy efficiency across the economy, and we know there's no silver bullet. So there have been some ideas trialled in other member states that haven't worked, the Green Deal in the UK, for example. And we know that it doesn't happen by itself, so we're working on a package of policy measures, and I'll explain how we build that up. We know there are different policies required because there are different barriers for different people sort of looking to make an investment. So some of those are informational. Some people just don't know what the best technology is. They don't know where to start or they don't have the time to do it. Clearly, a lot of people won't have the finance to do things. Split incentives is about landlord-tenant relationships. So if you're a tenant in a building, you're probably less likely to do something, since you will get the bill reduction, but you don't get the increased asset value there. So and as a landlord, you're not going to do it because you don't get the savings on the bill. And by hidden costs, we mean things like hassle factors and time constraints around businesses mainly. So in the household sector, for example, some people, even if they're offered free loft insulation, don't take it because their loft is full of junk and it's too hard to move it all out, so they don't bother. So we have to sort of consider all of these aspects when we're looking at the potential for energy efficiency across all sectors. So we did a bit more thinking about how to influence consumer choices with policy, and in our model across all the different sectors that you saw there, we have about 2,000 different cohorts or consumer groups. So you might imagine one of those consumer groups, and what we know is that only a proportion of that consumer group will be aware or engaged on energy efficiency. So some people just don't think about it at all. So just to zoom in on that a little bit, we know there are people that are already considering their options, those that think they can reduce their energy use but they're not sure where to start. And we've sort of characterised them this way, and there are others that think they have already put in place all the measures, and there are some that think energy is just not a top priority for them, so they don't think about it at all. So it's useful to sort of divide up groups of different cohorts within the sectors into these kind of categories, so we can start to think about this consumer choice, this uptake modelling part of our work. And of course, these opinions will vary depending on what kind of house you're in, what your business type is, what your budgets are, what your willingness to pay for different investments are. So these kind of multiply out in our model then, and we sort of end up with results like this. So this is a survey we did of the commercial building stock in Ireland, and I have some copies of the reports here for you to take home. So what you can see there is a fairly aggregated set of results across our different building types in the residential stock. We essentially asked them a few questions about energy efficiency and their likelihood to take up different measures. And for example, then we're showing in the hotel sector about 35% of building managers figure energy is just not a top priority for them. So they're in a cohort that's difficult to get with policy, unless of course it's regulation. So this highlights the need for regulation in some sectors perhaps. And then moving down the scale there, down to the guy with the glasses in the book there who's really looking at his options and much easier to engage with, so more likely to take up with lighter touch policies and measures. So that's sort of one area of policy. One area we can focus policy on is increasing consumer awareness and engagement. We know there's even a smaller group of those people who make a decision in a given year. So people sort of, if you're to retrofit a building, a room like this, for example, you might look at that every 5 years or so. But if you're to do the whole facility, it's a much longer term kind of a decision. So that sort of reduces what the pool of people who are available to get to do a measure in a particular year. Even less of them have the budget to implement that measure. Fewer then choose to do that versus buy a new car or do something other than an energy project. And that leads us to our annual uptake, which is what we're trying to drive as policymakers. So when you think about it, like in this conceptual framework, we can start to think about the policies and measures that can push more people to the right-hand end of the curve. So we can increase awareness and engagement through informational campaigns, promoting services and audits, so getting information to decision makers at the time that they're making a big decision on energy. We can't do much about the decision frequency, but we can do things about providing financial support, loans, performance contract models, and tax incentives to get people over the budget part of the equation there. Again, all to drive further uptake. So this is the thinking that's starting to get embedded into government now. That it's not just going to be a technical solution or a financial solution. There are going to be behavioural solutions and a whole suite of measures that we're going to need to get the uptake that we need. And then I mentioned for those that aren't aware or engaged, we're going to have to come in and regulate and say you have to do it at some point, because we have long-term targets for decarbonisation, which mean everything has to happen between now and 2050. So just to highlight some of the outcomes and just point at some of the specific policy recommendations that came out of this work. For a sector we haven't spoken about yet, the residential sector, we have a grant scheme in place at the moment, which is fine for people who can pay a certain portion of the upfront cost. So it's 30% of a grant, and you could have paid the other 70% yourself. But in order to drive further uptake, we need a low interest finance package to get people over that upfront finance cost. We're coupling that with some information to get them more aware and engaged. So if any of you had a building energy rating done for your house, you got a small report. We were making that a lot better. So we're making that a lot more informative based on actual energy use from your building. And then a sort of an ambition where you might wind up, and then sort of in between that, the costs and what measures you might do in order to improve the building energy rating of your house. So we hope that when people get that at a time when they buy a house, which is a crucial decision-making period for upgrades, that they have the information, they're more aware and engaged. Then we can present them with a low-interest finance package and a grant option, and hopefully drive further uptake. I talked about reaching unaware, that should say, consumers through regulation. Active promotion of the ESCO market. I'm not an expert in that area, but I'll throw a slide up at the end and point you towards our website with some of the work we're doing at SEAI on promoting the ESCO market. And we have a big problem in transport. Transport's sort of a third of our energy use, mostly fossil fuel. We don't control the technology here in Ireland. We can promote EVs, which will make a small contribution efficiency-wise, but we think there's a lot to do on behaviour change in transport. So if anyone has data around that area, we're desperately in need. And this is how we present the business case to government, essentially. So when we looked at all the measures and we modelled what it looked like to close the gap to our target, we estimate net costs of about $3 billion between now and 2020, leading to savings of $12 billion over the lifetime of the technologies installed, so an NPV there of $8 billion. The public sector has a stretch target for energy efficiency of 33%, so if they get the savings that they're required to do in the public sector, that essentially self-finances the supports that they'll have to give to other sectors in order to drive the target achievement. So that's good for government, and we've done some macroeconomic modelling to prove that there are sort of jobs benefits and GDP growth through this kind of work. So they can contrast that with the idea of a loss of competitiveness. So if we're not doing this in Ireland and all other member states are becoming more efficient, well then we're going to be getting behind the curve. We import about 85% or so of our energy into the country from outside. So anything we can do about efficiency reduces imports essentially. And of course there are fines and compliance costs for 2020 now on renewables. That has implications for efficiency. Essentially, the renewables are a percentage target. So we've sort of, if you imagine a pie of energy use, the more we can shrink that, because the renewables targets are percentage based, the less we have to do in renewables for the more we do on efficiency. So that message is getting through. So we need a targeted policy package. We need interactive and reinforcing policies across that cascading chart that I showed to drive people to upgrades. We need to raise the awareness of the personal gains available. So we find a lot of the uptake doesn't happen because you show someone a cost-benefit analysis. It happens because you tell them they'll be warmer or their workers will be more productive if the lighting is right and the heating and the temperature is right. So we're finding that there's a lot of different ways to sell the benefits of energy efficiency, again, beyond the value of the energy savings. And we need to really start to inform and engage citizens across society, because at the moment, I think it was probably the last question asked at the political leaders debate was about climate change, so it's not really as on the agenda as we think it needs to be. And just saying about that, we sometimes come up against this idea that in Ireland we don't have a level of emissions that could, even if we wiped it out completely, could be very impactful on a global scale. And what I would say to that is that I think a lot of what we do here in Ireland, technology-wise and policy-wise, spreads very quickly to Europe. And we're involved in a lot of fora in Europe and with the International Energy Agency and the like. And the way good policy ideas and good technology ideas propagate through that process and quickly get picked up in countries that are much more populous than ours and responsible for a lot more emissions than we are, I think gives us enough to go on in terms of potentially being world influencers on the problem. So I think this crucial part is to get really everyone behind this idea. And so I'm not just all wishy-washy and fuzzy policy talk. I said I'd show some of the specific data that went into this modelling that we did. 2 surveys here, which was a first for Ireland. So we had a lot of good data on the residential stock through the building energy ratings. So I think there's about 600,000 homes out of 1.8 million now for which we have building energy ratings where there's like 120 data points per house. And we can, of course, provide that data to anyone who's interested in playing with it. But we didn't have anything near that sort of level of detail for the commercial building stock. So we did a statistical representative sample of the stock in Ireland. So we sent people around to, I think it was about 1,500 different buildings and building types, and we had a statistician work out where they should go and to make that useful across all counties and all that kind of thing. And we came up with a sort of a physical representation of the stock. The second report there is one on attitudes. So we then sort of asked building owners and managers what the likelihood would be of them taking up certain measures and, given a presentation of the state of their building. So we got a feel for the likelihood and the propensity for different managers to take up measures, and I invite you to flick through those later today. And just some high-level results. What did we find out? So we think there are about 110,000, 109,000 buildings in the commercial stock in Ireland. You can see the way they're split there between mostly office buildings and retail, restaurants and public houses, warehouses and hotels, and we put a categorisation of large and small in there. Most of the building modelling on the commercial side was done using an SBEM model, for those who are into the technical side of things. There was a bit of talk about in-use factors and corrections there earlier. I thought at this stage I'd just mention that when we sort of built up our representation of how much energy these buildings use, we did calibrate that then to our overall energy balance for the country. So we have energy statistics on electricity, gas, solid and fuel use, and all of that across the commercial sector. So we were able to sort of make an estimation of the energy use across all these buildings using SBEM, and then calibrate that to the overall national energy balance. In terms of specific opportunities, with an estimate here that energy savings worth 195 million are available in the commercial sector between now and 2020. Specific findings from the survey report, 27% of buildings are fitted with less than 20% low energy lighting, so still some opportunities, low-hanging fruit there. The controls here say to me there's a lot of work that can be done there, and it sounds like these analyses that we heard from there from the last presenter could really help to tap into those. And in summary, I guess, suggesting that Ireland has a relatively unsophisticated commercial building stock and a high incidence of buildings with which relatively basic upgrades could lead to significant energy savings. So again, if you delve into the report, there's a lot more detail on where those opportunities are. This is the curve specifically for the commercial sector opportunities. So you can see sort of 21 opportunities across technical and behavioural measures listed there, and our estimate for what's possible technically. As I said, we layer over the top of this curve this propensity to take up these different measures, and we look at it in a packaged up kind of a way. So we don't anticipate that the full 6 terawatt hours of savings shown here are achievable in a policy sense. So a subset of those have been modelled in order to get to that 195 million worth of savings that I mentioned earlier. And finally, I just wanted to highlight that we are looking at energy performance contracting and ESCO modelling in a fairly serious way, and we grant aid a lot of projects through SEAI across all sectors. And we do that from the point of view of, we choose the winners in terms of who we fund from the point of view of not only the costs and benefits of the projects that are proposed to us, but the finance models used. So if they're in any way innovative, they tend to get a bit of priority in terms of the funding. And I'd invite you to take a look at our National Energy Services Framework part of our website if that's the area of the world that you're interested in, and do get in touch with us because we can help you through there as well. So that's it from me. I have a few copies of the Unlocking report available for you, as well as the survey, so enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks.
Hello. Thanks for your presentation. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how ESCOs are operating in Ireland compared to their prevalence in Europe.
Yeah, I wish I could. And I don't know, and that's why I'm pointing you towards the case studies. Unfortunately, yeah, it's not my area of expertise. I'm kind of I'm a bit outside of that. So I know we have a few examples. When I asked my colleague about it, he said, "Look, I have 6 or 7 case studies on how the ESCOs are going here." I participate in a concerted action on the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is essentially a bunch of us getting together twice a year across all member states, and we talk about our experiences on the, with all the different elements of the directive. One of them is about ESCOs, so I'm not in that work stream, but I'd be happy to forward to the organisers the reports of that work stream, so that'll have a good comparison of who's doing what in Europe on energy service contracting. I haven't heard that anyone's really winning massively and way out in front. Like I said, there's not a country that I know of that has really thousands of good, or one model that's just really rolling out. They all seem to be somehow bespoke. We've done some work here on model contracts to try to help with that part of the process. But I think there are other parts of the process where the wheels need greasing, if you would like to put it that way. So, but I'm not aware of what all of those are. But I'd be happy to send the organisers some of the work from the concerted action, which is a good summary of what's going on in Europe. Yeah.
The SME sector, if you take that sector and you lump into it agriculture and transport that's owned and operated by SMEs. Do you have any idea as to the size of the SME sector compared with residential or large industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. Not off the top of my head. I know our transport statistics, and I have a book over there, a few copies of our main statistical publication, which will break down the transport sector into private cars and light commercial vehicles and all of that kind of thing. I haven't done the sum and added that to the SME estimates. On agriculture, energy use in agriculture is kind of small compared to the other sectors, so we haven't done much on looking at that at all. Actually, that's not modelled in our study specifically. You suspect that would really sort of make that sector.
I just think today is really focused at large, sophisticated users.
Yeah.
Maybe people would disagree, but the elephant in the room is SMEs.
Yeah.
And how we get this stuff into SMEs.
Yeah.
Because IBM know what they're doing, and Tesco know what they're doing, and
yes.
so on.
Yeah, so the incentives at European level and I guess for us in terms of bang for buck, in terms of reaching targets and pushing companies to do things, it's easier for us to work with the 160 largest energy users through LIEN and get some big hits there than to work with thousands and thousands of SMEs. But at some point we're going to have to get there. The latest directive at EU level requires audits now for non-SMEs, so we estimate there's about 600 companies in Ireland, including some of the biggest, but then getting down towards the larger SMEs will need to do audits under that directive. So I think that offers an opportunity as well for anyone who can sort of pick up on these companies that are doing the audits to sort of make sure that they don't just pop that on a shelf then and somehow Sherpa them through to an investment stage based on something that the audit might identify. So. But I agree we need action across all sectors. So any sort of technology that's scalable up and down the size of businesses is going to help out. So thanks.
Sorry, just one question in terms of smart cities, and we hear quite a lot about it, but in terms of our planners and forward development and the fact we might actually be in a growth phase again, how do we actually cluster buildings these days? Do you think that our planners actually take that into consideration, given that one of the big challenges is the low-grade energy that's available in different buildings? You're trying to cool, and other ones maybe you're trying to heat, and lots of cities, we look across Europe these days, are using heat pumps and district heating systems. We don't seem to have made any progress, or I'm not aware that there's any talk about it. We certainly don't see that. I'm not sure, are there many planners here today, for instance? What's your view on that?
No one's nodding. Yeah, I don't think you have any planners here today. I don't deal directly with planners myself, but I don't think it's made that stage yet. But I know of a few small projects. In Tralee, there's a great example of a district heating project. I think the waste to energy in Poolbeg has a district heating pipe heading in towards Dublin, so there's been some thought put to it there, but I think that's still a little ad hoc, right? This is kind of one or two projects, probably driven by a champion for that kind of technology in those areas, so I don't think it's necessarily top down. I think there was an episode of EcoEye there last week where there was some talk about it. So there was a professor from Aalborg University talking on that exact topic. So you could check out that little clip and get a feel for what you think, if you think something's start brewing there. But I think it's something that we definitely need to start thinking about. We did a lot of work in Dundalk on a sort of a sustainable energy community up there. We're continuing with smart cities and collaboration across Europe on smart cities projects. But as to the planning, I can't answer the question directly because I don't know whether it's being adopted at local level. We do a little bit on local area renewable energy planning. So we put together a document at SEAI called LARES, which is Local Area Renewable Energy Strategies. And we're pushing that with local authorities who are redoing their development plans so that they can start to work out how to communicate with local communities on renewable energy developments in their area and make sure that benefits might be spread across the community and not just left for developers and those kinds of issues. So we've sort of tried to help them through the planning with that. And it might be that there's room for something on sort of heat planning and district heating. In fact, through the Energy Efficiency Directive, every member state was required to do a heat map. So Ireland's heat map will be out soon and available on GIS to sort of show where the big point sources for heat are. And I think that will help with that process. So once we have a good heat map, maybe you can start to hang policy off that and require things to be joined up. I think data centres is another big issue that we're going to have to tackle with. So we know that there's a few big data centres coming down the track. They're going to have a lot of waste heat. So where they're located could be crucial, and let alone the effect they'll have on our electricity demand. Some of the bigger ones being the size of a power station on their own. So this could really change the landscape in the coming years. If that's something that Ireland decides to go for, is sort of be the data centre for Europe, well, that will really have to change our thinking, how we manage our energy use and our electricity system in particular.